The old man in muddy boots never spoke much at the Saturday market. People saw him as just another stubborn farmer, always alone, always silent. Until one windy afternoon, a teenager knocked over his produce stand, and a silver star rolled out from beneath a pile of apples. The town had no idea who they'd been ignoring all these years. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. And don't forget to like the video. Every Saturday, rain or shine, Tom Baird rolled up to the town market in his faded red pickup, the kind with a cracked windshield and one stubborn headlight that flickered with every bump. Locals referred to him simply as Tom the Apple Man. They didn't know his last name. Few knew where he lived, and even fewer bothered to ask. He was part of the scenery, like the leaning water tower or the rusted windmill behind Miller's feet. Tom was well into his 80s, lean as a fence post but strong. His hands, sunburnt, gnarled, and thick with calluses, spoke of decades spent in the soil. He never haggled, never raised his voice. Just nodded when someone handed him cash, and muttered a thank you no louder than the wind brushing through the nearby cottonwoods. The town of Windham Falls, population 3,142, wasn't unkind. Just busy. Kids with earbuds and old men with their own problems didn't pay attention to a farmer with quiet eyes. Tom had a worn flannel, thick denim overalls, and boots that had seen more seasons than the mayor had seen elections. That Saturday started like any other. He parked in his usual corner near the church fence, laid out crates of apples on the tailgate, and waited. He brought only two varieties, crisp red and golden sweet. Every apple was hand-picked, polished with a rag from his back pocket, and placed gently in rows. Across the market, teenagers were goofing off near the smoothie truck. Music thumped from a wireless speaker. A football sailed overhead and landed near Tom's truck. One of the boys, tall, scruffy, cocky, raced after it. He tripped on the sidewalk and slammed straight into Tom's crates. The apples scattered. Some rolled under parked cars. One box flipped entirely, its contents spilling across the pavement. The silver object that followed it glinted in the morning sun, a military medal, perfectly polished, somehow nestled beneath the apples. It spun once on the concrete before coming to a stop at the boy's feet. The boy blinked. Hey, mister, you dropped this." Tom stepped forward slowly. His hand reached out, not shaking, not rushed, and took the medal without a word. He tucked it into his coat pocket and knelt to pick up the fruit. "Was that military?" one of the teens asked. "Like, from a war?" Tom didn't answer. He continued gathering apples, brushing dust off each one like a parent tending to children. The teen hesitated, then helped him gather the rest. A few adults stared, but no one said anything. At the edge of the crowd, Sheriff Will Garner watched from behind his sunglasses. He'd known Tom for 20 years, but never anything beyond apples and nods. Something about that medal stirred something old in him. Something from Iraq. A memory of a voice over the radio, calm under fire. Could it be? But he shook the thought away. Just another veteran, he figured. Just another quiet old man. Sunday mornings in Windham Falls were reserved for two things: church bells and gossip. By 9 a.m., both were in full swing. The teenager from the market, whose name was Kyle Peterson, couldn't shake the image of the spinning medal from his head. He'd posted a blurry photo of it on his Instagram story the night before, just the medal on the asphalt and the caption, "Old guy at market. War hero?" By morning, it had already made its way into local group chats, and Mrs. Henderson at the bakery had something new to chew on besides cinnamon rolls. "I always knew there was something about him," she told the next customer in line. "The way he walks. Too straight for someone that age." "Could have been a fake," someone muttered behind her. "Nonsense," said Sheriff Garner, stepping into the bakery just in time to catch the conversation. "It was real. Silver Star. That's not something you buy on eBay." He didn't elaborate. Just ordered black coffee and left. Meanwhile, Tom Baird was already back on his farm, for miles out past the edge of town where the road narrows and the fence posts are half swallowed by thistle. His property stretched across 70 acres of rolling orchard and fading corn rows, though only the apples remained profitable. The old barn sagged like it carried secrets. Chickens clucked lazily, and the creak of the windmill broke the silence now and then. Inside the house, Tom sat at a scarred oak table sorting through a tin box. Inside were letters bound with twine, a dog tag dulled by time, and two photos folded neatly into plastic sleeves. One showed 5 men in desert fatigues, all grinning, seated on crates beside a downed Huey helicopter. One of them, second from the left, was unmistakably Tom. Younger, broader in the shoulders, but the same unreadable eyes. The other photo was smaller, creased down the middle. It was a snapshot of a Vietnamese child, maybe 5 or 6 years old, clutching a water canteen like it was treasure. The back of the photo read, Danong, 68. She made it. So did we. Tom replaced the box in the drawer, then opened a weathered book of invoices and crop sales. The numbers were sobering. His savings would get him through the winter, barely. The price of fertilizer had gone up again, and the north fence needed mending before deer season. He sighed and leaned back. There was a knock at the door. Tom rose, slow but steady, and opened it to find Kyle Peterson standing awkwardly on the porch, backpack slung over one shoulder and a pie tin in his hands. "My mom made this," the teen said. "Sorry for the apples. And thanks. For, you know." Tom said nothing at first, just studied him like a book he hadn't decided whether to read. Then, with a slow nod, he took the pie. Kyle hesitated, then blurted, "Was that medal yours? From war or something?" Tom's voice was quiet. "Vietnam. Long time ago. Were you, like, in combat?" Another pause. "Yes." Kyle shifted uncomfortably. "I didn't mean to knock over your stuff. That was stupid." Tom almost smiled. "You helped pick them up? That's more than most would have done." There was a long moment of silence. Just the creak of the porch swing and the far-off hum of a combine across the fields. "Can I ask you something?" Kyle said. "Were you scared? Back then?" Tom looked out over the orchard, eyes drifting toward the old scarecrow standing sentinel in the corn stubble. "Terrified," he said. "But scared men can still be brave. That's the part no one tells you." Kyle didn't know what to say. He nodded and turned to leave. "Oh, and thank your mother," Tom added. "Good crust on that pie." Kyle grinned, then jogged down the porch steps, disappearing down the gravel drive. Tom closed the door and returned to his chair, setting the pie gently beside the tin box. He stared at it for a long while before murmuring, "Good crust, indeed." Outside, the wind picked up, rustling the apple trees. And for the first time in many years, Tom felt something besides the ache in his knees. He felt seen. By Tuesday, Tom Baird's name had spread through Windham Falls like warm butter over toast. It wasn't that anyone really knew who he was yet, not officially. But the medal had stirred up the dust of curiosity, and the town, as small towns do, had begun to assemble a picture from rumor, guesswork, and the few confirmed pieces they could gather. At the diner, Doris Chan, who'd run the counter for 40 years and missed nothing, had already pulled up a website listing Silver Star recipients. Baird, Thomas J., United States Army, awarded for gallantry in action, 1968. No photo, no details, just a name and a date. But that was enough. "That him?" she asked Sheriff Garner when he came in for his usual eggs and rye. "Could be," Garner replied, rubbing the back of his neck. "Can't say for sure. He doesn't talk much." Doris pursed her lips. "Man saves lives in a war and ends up selling apples alone. Seems backward." Garner didn't disagree. "We got a lot of folks like that. Just not usually in our backyard." Meanwhile, Tom remained exactly where he always was on his farm. The small ripple of interest hadn't changed him, though he did notice more second glances at the Saturday market, more nods from people who used to pass without a word. On Wednesday, the school called. Kyle's civics teacher had heard about the incident and asked if Tom would be willing to speak to the senior class. Veterans Day was coming up. "He doesn't do that sort of thing," Kyle warned. "I already asked." But to everyone's surprise, when the teacher called directly, Tom didn't decline outright. "I'll think about it," he said, then hung up. That evening, Tom sat on the porch beneath the soft orange sky, sipping weak tea. The orchard stretched before him like a painting in motion, rows of green slowly turning amber with the season. His old dog, Jasper, lay snoring by the step. The air smelled of earth and wood smoke. He heard the crunch of tires on gravel and saw a car pull up by the fence. A man stepped out tall, with broad shoulders and silver hair tied back in a loose knot. He wore a denim jacket with a patch on the sleeve, 25th Infantry Division. Tom didn't move. "Tom Baird?" the man asked. Tom nodded once. "I'm Roy Keller. We served together. I saw your name on a list going around online. Figured it had to be you." Tom's eyes narrowed, searching the man's face. Then something clicked. "Tunnel duty," he said. "See you, Chi, you're the one who carried Jenkins after the collapse." Roy smiled. "Took me years to forget that smell. Still can't look at a damp hole in the ground without twitching." Tom rose slowly. "Come sit." They spent the next hour on the porch, swapping memories as the sun fell behind the orchard. Neither raised their voice. Neither got emotional. But the silence between them filled with weight and recognition that only brothers in arms could share. When Roy finally stood to leave, he gripped Tom's shoulder. "I'm heading to the reunion in December. Fort Benning. You should come." Tom didn't answer. But after Roy drove away, he sat a long time in the dark, hand resting on Jasper's head, eyes fixed on the horizon. That night, he opened the tin box again. He took out the dog tag and the photo of the child from Danong. He turned it over and read the faded writing. "She made it. So did we." Then he unfolded something new, a yellowing piece of paper tucked beneath the metal. A letter from 1969. A citation. It described how Specialist First Class Thomas Baird had held the perimeter during a night ambush, protecting 6 wounded men and directing air support by radio while under sustained fire. He read the final line aloud, barely above a whisper. Displayed exceptional bravery with complete disregard for his own safety. Then he placed the letter gently back in the tin, shut the lid, and whispered to no one. "I was just trying to get them home." It started with a phone call. Not a dramatic one, not a ringing red phone in some Pentagon office. Just a quiet, unexpected ring from the landline in Tom's farmhouse, an old rotary piece mounted to the wall beside the pantry, its cord stretched and frayed. It hadn't rung in weeks. Tom dried his hands on a towel and lifted the receiver. "Mr. Baird? This is Ellie Granger from Windham Falls High. You spoke to my colleague about Veterans Day, the student assembly?" A pause. "We were wondering, hoping, you might reconsider. We've invited several speakers, but, well, we think your story might be something special. Would you come?" Tom leaned against the counter, glancing out at the orchard through the dusty kitchen window. A hawk circled above the treetops. The light was gold. He didn't answer for several seconds. "I'll come," he said finally. "But I'm not going to give them a war story." Ellie hesitated on the other end. "What will you give them?" "Something real," he replied. By the time Friday rolled around, word had spread far beyond the school. The auditorium at Windham Falls High could hold 300 people. By 9:15 a.m., every seat was full: students, teachers, and dozens of community members who hadn't stepped into the building in years. Even Doris Chan from the diner had shown up, sitting in the back row with a thermos of tea and a notepad like she was preparing to review a Broadway show. At exactly 9:30, Tom walked in. No grand entrance. No uniform. Just an old man in a clean flannel, jeans that had been pressed with care, and boots polished enough to reflect the overhead lights. He wore a brown field coat, and pinned to the chest was a simple ribbon bar, a silver star, a combat infantryman badge, and one tiny emblem shaped like a helicopter. The room quieted instantly. He stepped to the podium, cleared his throat once, and began. "I'm not a hero," Tom said. "Let's get that out of the way. I farm apples. I fix fences. And I spend a lot of time arguing with squirrels over whose tree it is." A few chuckles. "Good." The air loosened. "But some time ago, I was a soldier. A long way from here. In a place where the rain came sideways, and the nights sounded like whispers in metal." He glanced around the room. So many young faces. "I was 19 when I stepped onto Vietnamese soil. 19, and I thought I was a man. I wasn't. Not yet. But war makes things grow faster than nature intended." He told them about jungle patrols and midnight watches, about the smell of sweat and oil and smoke, about learning to read shadows and fear in silence. But he never used a single graphic word. He spoke softly and let the weight of his pauses say what others might have shouted. He described the day he and Roy Keller pulled a wounded interpreter from a collapsed tunnel, a child hiding in his arms. The girl had latched onto Tom's leg and refused to let go. She'd followed him for 2 days until the chopper came. He never saw her again. "War," he said, "doesn't end when the shooting stops. It ends when you've finally forgiven yourself for surviving it." There was no applause. Not yet. Just stillness. No one shuffled. No one checked their phones. Then, at the very back of the auditorium, a hand went up. A student. Tall, serious-eyed. "Mr. Baird," he said, voice clear. "Why didn't you ever tell anyone before? About your medal, I mean." Tom looked at him, and for a moment it seemed like he might not answer. Then he said, "Because medals don't measure character. And real service doesn't need an audience." He stepped back from the podium. Silence. And then the principal stood and clapped. Then a teacher. Then all at once, the entire auditorium erupted in a standing ovation. Not loud, not frenzied, but steady, purposeful, respectful. Tom simply nodded once, then turned and walked off stage. As he passed the exit, one of the teachers, Mr. Ballard, who'd served in Iraq, reached out and touched his sleeve. "Welcome home," Ballard said quietly. Tom stopped, met his gaze. and replied, "Took a while, but maybe I'm getting there." The following Monday, something curious happened. Tom's farm received more visitors than it had in the past 5 years combined. They didn't come in droves, not all at once. But they came. A young mother stopped by with her toddler and left a small paper bag on his porch. Inside were cookies and a crayon drawing of a medal with "Thank you, Mr. Apple Hero" scrawled across the bottom. Two high school boys who used to speed past his fence on dirt bikes came on foot that evening, heads down, carrying lumber and nails. They offered to fix his broken gate. Tom didn't say much, just nodded, pointed to where the wood had warped, and handed them the hammer. He brought out lemonade, unsweetened, but they didn't complain. He wasn't used to people staying long, or looking him in the eye when they shook his hand. That night, when the last light slipped behind the hills and the air took on the crispness of approaching winter, Tom lit a small fire in the hearth and climbed the attic ladder. He hadn't been up there in years. Dust hung in the air like memory. Cardboard boxes lined the wall. One of them bore a faint marker label, Mail, 1970 to 74. He found what he was looking for in the bottom corner. An envelope, yellowed with time, addressed in neat, looping handwriting. Nguyen Lon, the girl, the child from Da Nang. Tom had tried for years to find out what happened to her. After the war, he'd written to relief agencies, orphan networks, even sent a letter to the Red Cross. Nothing ever came back. This envelope was the last he'd written, a letter he'd never mailed. He brought it downstairs, sat at the table, and unfolded the contents. "Dear Lon, you probably don't remember me. I was the tall one who gave you my jacket. You cried when I left. I did too. They told me you made it to the camp near Da Nang. I don't know what happened after that. I just wanted you to know that you saved me more than I saved you. When you grabbed my hand and wouldn't let go, it reminded me what we were fighting for. Not for flags. For people. For life. I hope you are alive. I hope you grew up strong. If you ever read this somehow, I want you to know I never forgot you. With all my heart. Tom Baird." He stared at the page for a long time, then folded it back into the envelope and placed it in the tin box alongside the medal and photographs. The phone rang again. "Mr. Baird?" The voice was familiar. It was Ellie from the school. "Sorry to bother you. There's a reporter from the county paper. She saw the live stream of your speech. She wants to write a piece. She says it might be picked up by a national veterans magazine." Tom grunted softly. "I'm not much for articles." "I figured," Ellie said, then added carefully, "but I think your story might be something more people need right now, especially these days." He didn't say yes, but he didn't say no, either. The article ran that Sunday. Headline, "The Orchard and the Soldier, a Quiet Hero in Windham Falls." It included an old service photo someone had dug up, Tom in uniform, standing beside a chopper, sun glaring off his helmet. The piece was kind, respectful, unadorned. It focused on his return to farming, on the orchard he'd planted himself after the war, and on how he never once applied for recognition or veterans' benefits. The final quote read, "Courage doesn't retire. It just changes tools." That line hit home with many. The comments section overflowed. "My grandfather was like this. We need to remember these men before they're all gone. If you've ever known someone who served without asking for praise, tell us about them below." That comment prompt drew hundreds of responses. But Tom didn't see them. He wasn't online. Instead, he spent the afternoon pruning the northern orchard, where the soil was less forgiving and the deer more persistent. Jasper trailed behind him. The wind was dry and cold, and the leaves fell in gentle spirals around his boots. At one point, he paused beside an old tree, one of the first he'd planted after returning home in 1971. The bark was worn, but the roots were strong. He touched its trunk gently. "You've seen a lot," he murmured, still standing. Then he went back to work. The next week brought a letter. Not a bill, not a catalog. A real letter, with a foreign stamp and careful handwriting. Tom almost didn't open it. He wasn't in the habit of mail anymore. But the name on the return address stopped him cold. Long Nguyen Da Nang, Vietnam. His hands trembled slightly as he slid a blade along the top. Inside was a single sheet of paper, light as breath. "Dear Mr. Baird, I found your name in an article sent by a teacher in America. She said you spoke at a school and told them about a little girl in Vietnam. I am writing to say that girl was me. I am alive. I grew up in a refugee camp. Later, I was adopted by a French family. I became a nurse. I have children, and now grandchildren. I always remembered the man who carried me when everyone else was running. I kept the jacket you gave me until I was 20. I never forgot your name. I never forgot your kindness. Thank you. Lon. Tom sat very still. Jasper, sensing something shift in the air, placed his muzzle on Tom's knee. After a moment, Tom stood, walked to the fireplace, and took down the faded map pinned above the mantel. He stared at Vietnam, traced the outline with one finger. She made it, he whispered again. She really did. That evening, he didn't eat much. He just sat on the porch, watching the stars. His thoughts wandered through jungles and rivers, to a child's wide eyes, and to a young man who once believed he wouldn't see 20. Tom had lived a quiet life, and he was content with that. But now, something in him stirred. The next day, he returned to the school, not for another speech, but to ask Ellie Granger if she could help him write a reply. I haven't written anything in years, he admitted. And this needs to be right. They worked on it together. Ellie typed as Tom spoke slowly, carefully. He wrote about the farm, about Jasper, about the orchard, and he wrote about the letter he'd kept all those years, the one he never sent. Tell her, he said at the end, that I sleep better now. Meanwhile, the orchard had become something more than just a field. It was now a place of memory. Visitors began stopping by to leave small flags, notes, even stones painted by schoolchildren with words like honor and service. Tom never made a fuss. He never set up a donation jar or turned it into a spectacle. He simply added a bench under the old northern tree, a place for people to sit and be still. One Saturday, Carl came by again, this time with a camera and a notebook. I've got to write a senior project, he explained. They said pick someone who inspires you. Tom shook his head. That's a dangerous choice, son. I just grow apples. Yeah, Carl said. But you grow them after all that. That's what matters. Tom nodded slightly. All right then. But only if you help me stack wood afterward. Deal. Have you ever misjudged someone, only to realize later they carried more strength than you imagined? How did that change you? That comment prompt, placed at the bottom of Kyle's blog post a week later, became one of the most answered on the school website in a decade. Former students wrote in. A few veterans posted from out of state. The conversation grew. Tom never read it, but he felt it. He saw it in the eyes of neighbors who now lingered at his market stand, in the kids who waved from bikes instead of speeding past, in the retired Marine who showed up one morning just to shake his hand, eyes misty. The world had shifted, just slightly, and all because an old man had finally spoken. It was Ellie Granger's idea. The orchard's beautiful, she said, arms crossed and determined. And you've given this town more than apples. It's time people showed up for you for once. Tom didn't argue. He just gave her the kind of long look that said, without needing to say, you can go ahead, but don't expect me to put on a suit. And so, on the first Saturday of November, Windham Falls held its first ever harvest gathering at Baird Orchard. Flyers were posted in the library, at the gas station, and even stapled to the bulletin board at Miller's feet. A day of thanks, memory, and apples, the poster read. Below that, in handwritten black ink, someone had added, honoring a life of quiet courage. Tom watched from his porch that morning as cars rolled in, modest, local, nothing flashy. Just families, students, elderly couples with walkers, and a handful of veterans who arrived silently and stood near the trees like they were on sacred ground. Ellie had set up tables beside the barn. There were pies, cider jugs, hand-knitted blankets for raffle, and a small tent where Kyle had printed out photos from his interview with Tom, images of the farm, the meadow, and one particularly striking photo, Tom standing beside his oldest apple tree. One hand on the bark, gaze lost in the horizon. Looks like someone turned me into a museum piece, Tom muttered under his breath when he saw it. No, Kyle said. Just made the invisible visible. The townspeople gathered under a high autumn sky, cloudless and sharp. The air smelled of hay and cinnamon. Kids chased one another through the orchard while older folks wandered the rows, many stopping at the new bench under the northern tree where someone had left a note. To the man who taught us that growing something good is its own kind of service. At noon, Ellie tapped the microphone. Thank you all for coming, she began, her voice shaking slightly. When we asked Tom Baird to speak at the school, we didn't know the effect it would have. We didn't know that behind the quiet farmer was a man who gave more than most ever will and asked nothing in return. Tom shifted uncomfortably in the back. His boots creaked. He hated speeches when he was the subject. So today, Ellie continued, we say thank you, not just with applause, but with presence, with community, with acknowledgement. She turned toward him then. Mr. Baird, would you mind joining us up front? He sighed. Suppose I can't hide in the barn forever. As he approached, the crowd parted gently, respectfully. No one cheered. No one hooped. But every head turned. Every heart held its breath. Ellie stepped aside. We have something for you. A boy, maybe 12, stepped forward holding a wooden plaque. He handed it to Tom with both hands. Tom looked down at it. Thomas J. Baird, farmer, soldier, teacher of quiet things. Windham Falls thanks you. Tom held it, unsure what to say. The silence stretched, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was reverent. Finally, he cleared his throat. I never planted trees for recognition, he said. Just wanted to feed people. That hasn't changed. He looked out at the faces, young and old. But I'll tell you this. You've all made it easier to breathe these past few weeks. And that counts for a lot. The crowd remained silent. Then, from the far end of the orchard, an older man in uniform stepped forward. He saluted. Others followed. Veterans, firefighters, 2 retired teachers who'd once served. They formed a quiet line beside the bench, each one placing a hand on the tree. Tom watched, blinking more than usual. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. If you believe those who sacrificed for others deserve to be honored every day, subscribe to us, where we tell the stories that should have been appreciated long ago. Because quiet heroes never stop serving. That line, quiet heroes never stop serving, soon found its way onto bumper stickers, t-shirts, and, eventually, into the town's Veterans Day parade float. But Tom never asked for any of it. He just kept tending the orchard. The orchard's leaves had fallen now, curling brown at the base of every tree like quiet memories. Windham Falls was shifting into winter. The smell of frost edged the air, and the first snow arrived silently one morning, dusting the ground in white before most of the town had stirred. Tom Baird was already up, as usual, coffee steaming in his thermos and Jasper sniffing along the porch rail. He stared out over the rows of sleeping trees, now bare and resting. It was the season of stillness, a time farmers respected more than anyone. He took a slow breath, the kind that stretches into ribs long quiet from deep emotion. Then, without much ceremony, he pulled on his coat and headed toward the barn. Inside, by the old workbench, sat a pile of mail. Ellie still helped sort through the messages. Dozens of them now arrived each week. Letters from veterans' families, old students, even one from a former Army pilot who said, "We never met, but I heard your name in a briefing in '68. I never forgot it." Tom didn't answer every letter, but he read each one. That day, however, one envelope caught his eye. It was thick. Foreign stamps again. France. The letter inside was written in tight script, formal but heartfelt. Dear Mr. Baird, my name is Sophie Delorme. I am Lonwyn's daughter. She passed peacefully last month. In her final days, she spoke often of a man who once saved her in the jungle. She said finding you again brought her peace. That your let her die without fear. She asked that I send you this. She kept it all her life. Inside the envelope was a photograph. A child, no more than 6, clinging to an American soldier's leg, his face half turned from the camera, but unmistakable. Tom Baird. The back read in delicate handwriting. He carried me until I could walk on my own. Tom sat down. He stared at the photo for a long time. Then he placed it carefully into the tin box. Closed the lid. Rested both hands on top. Outside, Jasper barked once. Someone was approaching. Tom stood and stepped out into the snow, where Kyle was walking up the path, notebook in hand, cheeks red from the cold. I heard about Lon, he said quietly. Tom nodded. Her daughter wrote. Said she was at peace. Kyle hesitated. I've been thinking about the orchard. We're learning about legacy in school. Most people think it's about buildings and names on plaques. But I think it's more like planting trees you'll never eat the fruit of. Tom looked at him with quiet approval. You're learning fast. Kyle smiled. There's a scholarship in her name now. The school set it up. For girls from refugee families. They're calling it the Baird and Gwynn Scholarship. Tom blinked, taken aback. They didn't ask me. Kyle shrugged. Didn't think you'd say no. Tom looked out over the orchard one more time. The rows of trees. The wind. The light snow gathering on branches like silk. He spoke softly. Then let it grow. Later that week, Ellie returned to the porch with news. You were asked to attend a national ceremony next spring. Arlington. Veterans being honored for distinguished but previously unrecognized service. Tom shook his head, almost laughing. I'm done with medals. But Ellie smiled. It's not about medals, Tom. It's about presence. He didn't answer right away. Then he said, I'll think about it. As the snow thickened, the town began preparing for the holidays. Lights went up, stores bustled, and school let out early. Tom brought in his final crates, covered the tools, and settled into winter's quiet rhythm. He kept to himself, mostly. But each week, he visited the school once. Just to sit. Sometimes to talk to kids. Sometimes just to listen. In early December, he found another note on the bench beneath the northern tree. I want to be like you when I grow up, but I don't want to wait till I'm old to help people. He folded it gently, placed it in his pocket. And as he walked back toward the house, boots crunching through the snow, he felt something different in his chest. Not pride. Peace. What moment in your life did justice arrive late but sweet? And that is how Tom Baird, once a shadow at the edge of town, became something else entirely, not by asking for recognition, but by living quietly, planting good things, and carrying what he could until others could walk on their own. If you like this story, please like and subscribe to the channel. Let YouTube promote stories of kindness.